Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, a sprinkling of philosophy, organizing psychology, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, Flores. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. And the interesting thing about today is
Yes. Tell me.
we were discussing things on the Discord server that we have, Mount Movement, and
Yeah.
we actually got a question to
Nice.
answer on the pod today. So
Yes.
that's pretty exciting.
And just quickly, anyone who is interested in being part of the conversation and joining the movement, please make your way over to Discord. I will leave a link in the description for you with an invite. Yeah, come over and be part of the conversation. We continually have chats like what we do in this podcast all the time within the various channels in that server. So don't be shy. Come on over and we will make you feel very welcome.
Okay. And for today, we do have a question from Jack that I thought would be a pretty good topic. So Jack writes to us, I'm a working class guy. I can't just stop labouring in protest. I have people who depend on me and I live paycheck to paycheck. I am also fortunate enough to work a job for a company that have been much kinder to me than any before. I feel torn between my desire to see a socialist revolution and protecting what I've managed to elk out of the system as it is. How should I navigate the system and oppose it at the same time?
Whoa. Can
It's
I
an
just
interesting
say,
question.
yeah, can I just say, and like, whoa. Well, I think that is very much exemplifies a lot of the feelings and the sentiments that come out of being part of the working class in the 21st century. Like, you'll hear right-wing commentators and your Jordan Peterson types who get up and rally against lefties and those dirty commies out there and stuff like that. And he'll say something like, well, have you really got it that bad? Like, capitalism has done pretty well. You've got a pretty nice life, so suck it up. And there is a feeling, like you do get a feeling that should you just be grateful for what you have got and just be accepting of your little plot and your relative appearance as just another cog in the machine, another brick in the wall, 4AS, etc., all of those cliched ideas. And do you just be happy living this capitalist existence? And it's difficult to come to terms with being a conscious individual and knowing that ethically there's a better way of doing things than just the capitalist rat race. But at the same time, hey, you can etch out a living for yourself and you can support people and loved ones and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot to be grateful for, but there's also a lot to be desired. And it's a conflicting situation to be in.
Well, the thing that kind of sticks out to me, and I brought up the definition so I can say it today. The thing that sticks out to me is in this question, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance.
Oh.
And
we're using that term right, aren't we, 4AS? Because I hear a lot of people drop this one round, drop this one oh yeah, I'll just put that into my vocabulary. But cognitive dissonance.
Well, let the listeners and the watchers decide for themselves, because the official definition of cognitive dissonance is a psychological state of discomfort that occurs when a person's beliefs, values, or actions are inconsistent. It can motivate people to change their beliefs or behaviors to restore balance.
I think that pretty much is the definition right there, isn't it?
Well, I think what Jack is trying to get at is, well, I guess living day to day, the material conditions that we all live under is that we can't, like, we have to work for a wage in order to exist and subsist in
Yes.
society.
Yes.
However, I guess when you're reading theory, or at least you're contributing to leftist spaces and that sort of thing, you hear about a protest here, a community garden there, what the various local, I don't know, socialist party is doing. And I think where the cognitive dissonance is that you're given a you're given an impression that socialism, or at least reaching the revolution, it's not a part-time job. But
Yes.
so you are stuck in this holding pattern where it's like, well, I want to contribute more, but how is that possible? Like,
Mm.
it's like a type of analysis paralysis, if you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it's interesting. It's worded in the sense that, I can't just stop everything either. So like you're in a bind. As you said, you need to exist and you need to subsist. But then there's also a feeling that because I guess your moral code or your ethical code aligns with something that is different just to existing in a world where everyone's driven by a profit motive, you want to do something. So like he said, I feel torn between my desire to see the socialist revolution and protecting what I've managed to eke out of the system as it is. Now, like, I'm no philosopher, but I do dabble, 4IS. And I would say that is an inherent contradiction in the working class. And not only the working class in terms of the proletariat of an industrial society, but specifically, as I was saying before, the contradiction inherent in the working class mentality of someone living in the 21st century and in an advanced capitalist nation. So there is this idea that Lenin speaks about, and like, I am not going to use this in a pejorative way because you can use this, but I think it's more telling in this context of something else, and it's the aristocracy of labor,
Yeah.
as you are familiar with, Forrest, I
Yeah.
know. But it is a very interesting concept because it's a bit tongue in cheek, right? The aristocracy of labor, like harkening
Yeah.
back to the days of feudalism and like calling an actual class of the working class, or a subset of the working class, as like being aristocracy, so untouchable by birthright kind of thing, which is,
Yeah.
it's very, very sharp juxtaposition and form of hyperbole there, because like you're really saying, hey, these people, are they really working class anymore? Because, they're a form of aristocracy. And what he's talking about is labor in advanced countries, industrialized nations, at a certain point, because of like things like colonialism, or what he would describe as, imperialism in the capitalist sense, you have a system where like the capitalist corporations, so the bourgeoisie, all that sort of stuff, engulfs the world under the capitalist mode of production that breaks beyond national boundaries. And so the working class in an advanced country kind of does have the luxuries that capital brings back to the motherland. And so they become an aristocracy of labor, and like they get used to certain conditions, and they've had their fights already, their struggles against labor, against capital. They did that like, in the 1850s or something like that. So they got good conditions, and they got holidays, and they've got social infrastructure, good schools, and a healthcare system. So like, they turn around and they're just like, they understand that there's a proletariat out there in Bangladesh, or there's one in the Philippines, or in Kenya, or something like that. And they don't give a shit, really, because, they're pretty comfortable. And they'll fight, though. They'll struggle against capital to make sure that they maintain the conditions that they have. But they are no longer a revolutionary agitator. They're a revolutionary force. They are no longer agitating for revolution, which is what is being discussed in this sentiment, in this feeling, this contradictory relationship. You understand the importance of the socialist revolution, but are you agitating for one? And so like people are like torn. It is something that is conflicting inside you. And I said it's a dialectical relationship. And sometimes you win. The socialist revolutionary within you wins. And you feel like, bashing down the doors of the global capitalist order. And other times you're just like, you know what, I need to just sit back. I've worked really hard this week. I don't have much energy left. Like I need to just like relax and look after me right now. And like there's obviously no collectivism in that train of thought. There's no solidarity in that train of thought because you're thinking along what would be described as very individualistic mindset, which is what capital does. It helps atomize us all and separate us from one another. So we don't collectivize and we don't look to organize against capital because capital can't stand that. Capitalists hate organization.
Yes, and if I'm remembering correctly, this is from left-wing communism and infantile disorder.
Yeah,
And if I
yeah,
remember, and that what I remember is Lenin was specifically going straight for the unions, for example, that were effectively resting on their laurels because
right.
they had won the
Yeah,
material conditions, especially when you compare, even look at today, when you compare what would be considered developed countries in comparison to developing countries,
yes,
let's take the stream that you did the other day. The one from TikTok where there was that lady from Africa that had to see some pretty horrific things.
yeah.
I
This is the digital colonialism
Yeah, the
discussion.
digital, yeah,
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 yeah.
and like she saw some pretty horrific things to ban from the TikTok algorithm,
Yeah.
but equally so to um to make the point that Jack's making here is that there's probably somebody who's sitting in America or sitting in Australia that's a manager that oversees all of these things and probably has a good pension fund, probably good benefits,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
could you particularly say that they're in solidarity with that
Yeah.
person that's being screwed over in a developing country?
That's right. And I think that's what we have to recognize as well is that social capitalism, sorry, is global. Like this isn't the 1850s anymore. This isn't what Marx was dealing with or even Lenin was dealing with. Like I know he was dealing with imperialism, but not developed like it is post neoliberal era. Like the world is a very small place for us, and like colonialism doesn't work at the end of a gun barrel anymore. It works at the end of a hostile takeover, and consultancies going in and like sapping up very exploitable labor forces in third world countries and things like that. So the battle is different these days.
Yeah.
So we need to look at it less along the lines of like how can we get a socialist revolution started in our country. It should be more how do you get a socialist revolution started internationally. That's really the question I would find. And like, while that is like way more daunting for us, like way more daunting, like it's hard enough to organize a national liberation movement, let alone, a global world order. But like at the same time, that's incredibly liberating in itself, the notion that it's not just up to me and the people that like I ostensibly have connections with on a national level. It's up to all of us in the working class. And we do have to show solidarity with people that are being exploited in third world or developing countries. And the labor aristocracy, while an aristocracy in like a facetious way, in a sarcastic way, I don't think it at all insinuates that the aristocracy are removed from the working class at all. I don't think it insinuates that. What I think it insinuates is that, like you said before, they've done their big battles and they're resting on their laurels because they think that they are in a comfortable enough situation for them to forever be given just enough of the fruits of capital, just enough of like a share of that general wealth, as Marx would talk about, to eke out a decent living, not just a living, but a decent living. And might I say, as we move further into the 21st century, what do we see happening around us? We see a rise in right-wing populism in Europe, in North America, in Western society at large, and that is a response to the degradation of the social welfare state and Western society's enforcing or regulating of capital to make sure everybody gets a bigger slice of that pie. The slice of the pie for the working class, even for the labor aristocracy, is getting smaller and smaller. People are complaining about cost of living crisis, living standard issues, inflationary crisis, housing crisis, like all of these crises, events kind of things are a result of, like, you know, people squeezing the working class and the aristocrats of labor. They're not missing out on this one. This isn't just squeezing the third world anymore. This is coming back to bite people. And so, like, we have to think of capitalism as a global event.
Yes, but I think probably the last point before we move on is important to probably the anxiety that's kind of expressed in this question is well, more to what you were saying, the degradation of social democracy. Because the thing though is that you don't have to look far through history to see that there's been a decline even here in Australia. Like for example, unions have helped out a decent part of Australian culture here, and you know it was only just last year that the CFMEU was put into administration. It was effectively put in its place by capital.
Yes.
And like that's the thing about these kind of wins by whether you refer to them in the tongue-in-cheek way that Lenin does as the labor aristocracy, or you know anyone that lives in solidarity spaces, because that's fundamentally what that is that okay, your forefathers or you know the people before you have done really well to eke out the living that you live in the good graces of. Like the funny thing is that if capital doesn't really want it, tomorrow you could not have those advantages that you had.
Yes.
And
yes.
like I think that's kind of the anxiety that Jack is expressing here. Like maybe not in the social democracy way, but I think that of like, okay, I've got a really good paying job now, but could there be a recession tomorrow and the boss is going to kick me out the door?
Yeah, and like I just want to pause and like reflect on that as well. Like if you feel, anyone out there that's listening to this, if you ever feel kind of guilty that you feel lucky enough to have a good relationship with your employer, and like you think because of your socialist or your communist or your revolutionary inclinations / tendencies that you shouldn't be able to feel good or lucky or appreciative of the fact that you've landed a good job within a corrupt system, then let me just say this right here. Give yourself a break. Give yourself a break. There is nothing wrong with lucking out or even working your ass off to get yourself into a position where you are more comfortable within the capitalist mode of production. If you are lucky enough to find an institution, an organization that works within an ethical framework, and they look after their employees and they give people good conditions and they give people good remuneration for the work that they do, don't ever feel guilty about that. And don't think that you're not struggling against the system by, like, I don't know, selling yourself out to the highest bidder and the person that is the nicest to you compared to other employers in the past or other capitalists that you've had to confront with your labor power. Don't worry about that. That is something like you should be very, very happy that you have found, because I want to just reiterate this because we've said it a few times, I'm sure, on this podcast, if not 100, that like, you Marx, Lenin, Engels, like the classics of scientific socialism, let's say, they did not think that capitalism or capitalist social relations themselves were evil. Okay? Capitalists, individuals may be evil. They may be conniving. They may be probably some of the scummiest people on earth, especially financial capitalists. You got to watch out for those ones. But the capitalism is not evil, or partaking in the capitalist mode of production is not evil. It is, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, or you want to hear this or not, it is as alienating to labor as it is for the capitalists. Marx spends a lot of time, which is really interesting, in things like the grunge research and things like Capital, like kind of talking about like this weird phenomenon that happens to the capitalists, where in order for them to survive in the system, because of the laws, of course, of competition and what have you, they are impelled to kind of reinvest the capital they accumulate to get more and more, because if they don't, they get left behind and they get eaten by some other capitalist who's far more aggressive and predatory than they are. And so under the laws of coercive competition, if you somehow found yourself a little oasis, a little island that floats off in the vast sea of the capitalist world order and actually looks after its employees or something like that, or is even honorable to work for, don't beat yourself up too much. That's all I wanted to say for us. Don't beat yourself up too much.
Yeah. But I think we've obviously come to the part of the conversation which, is the question itself, or at least what it's trying to say, or at least trying to ask is, how should I navigate the system and oppose it at the same time? So, we've obviously explained, why you feel that cognitive dissonance.
The cognitive dissonance, yeah.
but what should be done? And we haven't actually talked about this idea that much on the podcast, but a good way to go is what anarchists would say is prefiguration, or what's more commonly known of is prefigurative politics. So imagine and actually do the future that you envisage for society.
Yeah.
So the typical one that anarchists would talk about is, mutual aid funds, or actually the community gardens and so on and so forth. But sometimes they just say get involved in your local institutions.
Yeah.
Sure, I've talked about previously about how I've gotten involved in the Labour Party, and speaking of the CFMEU, they were a huge reason why. They're a huge reason why when we tried to commit Labour in 2022 to actually stop selling of public housing when they came into government, we got that across the line, and it was actually on the floor being discussed, and we made it party policy with the help of the CFMEU, was thanks to us doing coalition building. And just to kind of add to that, obviously that is much more traditional avenues. For example, I was walking around Ultimo, and I stumbled across a revolutionary bookshop, and I walked in, and I was having a look at everything, and then the person around the counter was somebody from the Socialist Alliance that I had done, participated in protests with. So when we obviously had, in the past, discussed certain things, and, we struck up a conversation. But, if you just look around and, another piece of area, speaking of community gardens, is, if you just go down the road and Parramatta Road all the way to Camperdown, there's community gardens there. Uh, and they're always looking for donations or for people to help out. And it's one of those things where, hey, if you look into the history and do some research of where you are in your area, maybe that's a great way to start coalition building. Maybe there's an initiative that needs to be done, and if you're participating, if you're heading initiatives that I don't know, you feel like the government or any local official isn't working towards going towards addressing the cost of living crisis, yet you're part of the coalition, I guess in a kind of Black Panther-esque way of helping out the community, maybe people might start listening to you. Sure, you're today not able to start the revolution, but if you build prefigurative institutions that in the end, when the time comes, you're able to have that sort of faith within the community, maybe that might be all the difference.
Yeah, having good networks is very important, because you never know when a scene or an issue can come alive. You just never know. And so yes, having existing networks and groups, connections of people in the political sphere and communities, what have you, in order to be able to organize around an event or a social issue or a political ideal, will help you in the long run, if the opportunity ever arises. So if there is kind of a crisis moment, an emergency situation, and you need to act on that. So yes, networking and being part of a community is very important. While we're on the topic of anarchist stuff, I couldn't help but think of direct action. So if you really wanted to make a small difference, next time you're at your local supermarket and they've got an automatic checkout and they've replaced workers for a machine, maybe get the most expensive thing on the trolley and not scan that one. See if you get away with it. That type of, that fights the capitalist machine, right? And if everyone started doing that, kind of thing, it'd eat into their profit margins. They'd have to have a think about whether they continue with automation, or they go down the path of hiring people. Maybe they don't hire people to scan your goods anymore, but maybe they'll hire a bunch of security guards that will stand there and at gunpoint watch you, make sure you scan everything. So, a bit of direct action always helps if you really want to do something and you're really struggling to think of what you could do that is effectual, without literally starting some type of vanguard and trying to stage a coup, which is pretty dramatic and would do the trick, I would say, but it's also a big ask, and like you said, for someone that's got a job and has people that depend on them, it's probably unrealistic, let's be honest. So every little thing counts, they do say. I think that is a general anarchist philosophy, so don't be shy about getting your hands dirty every now and again at the automated checkout. Little things. It's the little things. But I want to talk about kind of, when you mention things join a community organization or just get involved with a community garden or something like that. There is this overwhelming feeling sometimes when you hear that. You're yeah, I've heard that one before. Yes, me going down to the community garden and growing some basil, that's going to bring down world capitalism. So there is obviously that kind of that feeling that you get from that, which is yeah, it's nice, but is it going to do anything? And that feeling is justified. It does feel a bit lame, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But you have to think of it in this sense, okay? Capitalism, and I'm coming to understand this more and more centers on the relation. It's a bunch of social relations. Okay, if like someone asked you what happened in the Middle Ages in Europe, then you'd probably be like, oh well, there was a king, and then there was a bunch of lords, and then they all paid homage to the king so they could have their own lands and keep their lands. And every now and again, if the king needed an army, they'd all fight for him and they'd bring their peasants along. And in the meantime, the serfs and the peasants would make all the food for the lords. And then there's like a church that like looked over that. If like someone asked you what happened in the Middle Ages, like you'd explain, like you'd start to analyze the social relations.
Yeah.
There was a king at the top, and there were a majority of people at the bottom, and there were all these layers in between, kind of thing. And so, like, if you ask someone what capitalism is, they'll be like, "Oh, you know, it's like when you make money in free market and stuff like that." And it's like, okay, that's the economics of it. All right, people like to make money, but like capitalism really is a social system. It is a network of incredibly complex social relations, and those social relations, at their core, in this day and age, especially in later stage capitalism, are fundamentally about exchange relations. So like the way I relate to most people in my life, for us, is I've never met them, but like they probably make my breakfast for me. So like when I wake up and I put a piece of toast in the toaster, a lot of people that came together to make the toaster. I'll tell you that much for free. And those are my social relations. But all of that is masked by another term that we love to use, like fetishization or fetishism. And so like the monetary value of the toaster marks the fact that it like masks the fact that, you know, there's lots of people that came together to deliver me breakfast in the morning. And so like social relations themselves really boil down to two things, like let's say a primary relationship within the capitalist, and everything else refracts off the top of this. Okay, it is the social relation that is built around capital and labor. So capital is this thing that realizes itself, that continues to move. It's not money, it's not commodities, but it's this thing that continues to keep itself in motion so it can realize its self-realization, its reproduction, let's say, is to realize itself by continually expanding, and we call that profit. So it keeps moving and growing and stuff like that. And who does that? Who puts capital into motion? Capitalists. And how do you make profit? Like, what's this magical element? It is the fact that capital employs labor power to produce value that wasn't there before, but specifically surplus value. Specifically surplus value. And so, let me just say this. Anything that undermines that core relationship between capital and labor, or the capitalist and laborer, is a attack on capitalism. As little as you think you're doing, or as large as you think you're doing, whether you're going to form one of the largest unions in your country that's going to take down the biggest industrialists and the biggest capitalist organizations in your country, to you saying, no, I'm not going to buy lettuce anymore at the supermarket. I'm going to plant lettuce in my backyard, and I'm going to live off all of that lettuce anymore. And you take away that market relation, because all capitalism is, at the end of the day, is a bunch of exchange relations. And if you take away someone's avenue for profiting off that, and like everyone started who had a backyard or had like a balcony or even a window that you could hang out those little planter boxes that hang out the window kind of thing, everyone started growing their lettuce, there would be no lettuce capitalist anymore. Lettuce capitalists, those bastards, lettuce capitalists would cease to exist, because the exchange relations that perpetuate their existence, their reproduction, would disappear. And I know that's a weird example, okay? I know that's a really weird example, but like, if you really want to know what you can do, like anything at any level, as local as you can find it, as international as you can find it, with 1,000 other people, or yourself as an individual, or a bunch of mates, if you can undermine that relationship, that central relationship between capital and labor somehow, or just just undermine the exchange relation somehow, you're doing your bit. And if you can convince a few other people to do that, and this is why we have our movement for AS, for
Yes.
everyone that's involved, Jack included. This is why we get together and talk about this stuff and we try to influence other people. Because if you can get a bit of momentum under something, that's how a general strike happens.
Yeah.
Like, how good's a strike? How
Yeah.
dangerous is a general strike? That is like the embodiment right there of the struggle between capital and labor, like in the general form. It's like all of these unions from all these various sectors in the entire economy being like, you know what, we are way more powerful together than as individuals.
Yeah, and people
Way
have to
more.
remember that like that's the reason why we have such phrases like a spanner in the works.
Mm,
Because there were unionists and there were working people that if the capitalist wasn't giving them the right pay or wasn't paying them correctly, they would be like, oh, well, fuck you. I'm
mm.
just going to destroy your capital.
Yeah. I just got that spatter in the machine there. Oh, whoopsie. And like, yeah, and they'd be out. And like, these people would organize amongst each other to stand against capital. Because at the end of the day, okay, and here is my grand thesis for everyone that's listening to this. As much as we live in a capitalist mode of production, and like it would feel that we are beholden to these capitalists, this ruling class, the bourgeoisie that sits above us and makes all the calls. At the end of the day, capital really only reproduces itself and exists because it can make a call and employ labor and tell it what to do. So when the capitalist comes up to you or your employer comes up to you and they offer you a contract and you sign on the dotted line and say that you're going to be working for them, you're fully employed, you agree to their terms. You agree to their terms. And if everyone agrees to their terms as little individuals and stuff like that, then they will be able to say jump, and like everybody as an individual will just say, look, how high? Straight away, how high? And like if you don't do it, then they'll fire you. Or they'll find somebody else that'll do it and maybe you'll get demoted, or they'll eventually squeeze you out of that organization and you're done for. But as soon as everybody starts saying, no, I'm not going to jump that high this time, and everybody has like a mass rejection of that because they've all spoken to each other and they've all had a little chat. And like once capital is aware that labor won't do what it says, capital will not be able to reproduce itself anymore. It's actually the one in the vulnerable position there. Because if labor was smart enough to work as a group in its own interests, capital would be completely screwed. Because the only thing it has is this illusion that as long as they're all individuals, they will do what they're told and they will produce me value and they will produce me surplus value so I can profit off it. But as soon as they start coalescing and deciding that they're not going to do something, like let's say you have 100 employees in a capitalist organization and all 100 of them say no, it's not like the capitalist can just be like, all right, you're all fired and in 30 seconds replace 100 people. That's a big process. That's a big process. And so like, capital knows that, and labor really used to know that. Like everyone used to know that. And they're just like, let's just get together and we'll strike. And like that got out of hand. And so they brought in laws and industrial relations bodies and legislation and all this sort of stuff to rein in the power, because people knew how much they could screw over capital if they just all worked together. And so like, if you're really wondering what you can do, and if you work in a private organization, I can't speak for other countries. I can only speak for the Australian example. We have pretty low union rates, I think, in many private organizations around this country. Probably not construction. That's probably pretty heavily unionized, even if you're in a private like company as opposed to working in a government sector. But like for the most part, in the private industry, I would say that union membership is pretty low. And I'm not saying that you need to go out and become like, get employed by the union and be a union organizer and spend all your time doing all that sort of stuff. No, but like there's nothing like a bit of solidarity, because that is the one weapon that Labor has, a bit of solidarity.
I guess this was also what I was kind of getting at when I was suggesting like coalition building, because like
Mm,
yeah, okay, the first prospect of thinking about, I don't know, volunteering at your local community garden, like obviously you've been like, okay, well, how exactly is that helping anything? And like you don't know exactly who runs that place, but for all you know, you might do some volunteering there, and you find the people that are actually running that is your local socialist group, and maybe you might find some like-minded people. Sure, they might go to a protest here and there, but maybe there's initiatives in the background that you wouldn't have known if you'd had volunteered.
mm,
And sure, like it will help in your solidarity in order to connect those people. But if there are initiatives in your community where the community is trying to take care of itself, maybe tomorrow when people are much more likely to listen to your vision or listen to your story, much like the movements in the past, you might be able to convince those people because they're actually seeing, material you affecting material conditions in your community.
yeah, yeah, praxis.
Yes.
Praxis. Like there is theory and there is praxis. Like I am all about theory. Okay. I love some theory. I love a good debate. I'm a content creator. Okay. Theory is what I do. But like praxis is important in the sense of like, and it's at any level. Let's be honest. At any level. Like I said, you can just be, not scanning stuff at the automated checkout. If you want like to going on and full, union organizing or trying to establish your own revolutionary vanguard party that will one day overthrow your corrupt government. Take your pick. Anywhere within that spectrum is fine, but praxis is very important because you learn pretty quickly what's to do and what not to do. And like before that, it was all theoretical. Something might seem like a really good idea on paper, and you try it out for like, 20 minutes and you're like, fuck, this was a bad idea. Or something
Mm.
that you might have thought that was just like, I don't know, man. I don't really think that's a great idea. I don't really want to do that. And that ends up blowing your mind and being like the thing that takes up your time, and gives you energy and vitality in life. Once again, you just don't know until you try things. And this is a good lesson, I think, from none other than Karl Marx, is the idea of economic struggle. And what we're talking about here is like, how do I navigate the system and oppose it at the same time? Like, you don't have to just be a revolutionary or try to win over or start the next revolution. You can oppose something by struggling against the system in an economic sense. So like, whatever you want to do to like undermine the exchange relation, as I was saying, or join a union or something so you have solidarity with other working people in your particular circumstances. These type of things are known as the economic struggle. So
Mm.
you can have the political struggle too, where you form a political party and try to challenge the bourgeois system. These things are not revolutionary, but they train the working class and give them the building blocks in order to unleash the revolution or be in a good place for when the revolutionary time is right. That's when they can move into action because they've been in the political system, because they've been in a political party, and they've been as independent economic thinkers within the economy because they've been challenging the system and they've been watching what the capitalists have been doing, and they've been asking for their own rights and they've been asking for their own autonomy and stuff like that. They've been watching and they've been figuring out the system. They're not just running in blind. And so if the opportunity presents themselves, they're ready. They're ready to take it. You'll never really be ready, but like you'll be more ready than if you did nothing at all. And
Yeah.
like that is a very, very important thing to remember. Be involved in the economic struggle. And like from that, is an admission or an understanding that, like, okay, revolution might not happen for me, and it might not happen in my lifetime. But if I am making sure the legend continues, the feeling never dies as to what it is to be working class and fight for our own interests as a class, then you never know when the opportunity will arise, and we will ensure that people are technically, well, they're as ready as they can ever be if the opportunity arises. I know the feeling, the pressure that is just like, damn, you want it to happen within your lifetime or within your generation or something like that. And like, there's a lot of pressure on people's shoulders about that. If you call yourself a revolutionary or a socialist or a communist or something like that, you feel the pressure. You want to be the one that brings capitalism down to its knees. Like, who wouldn't? Hey, who wouldn't? But like, there's nothing wrong in making sure that like we are continuing in the struggle to arm ourselves in the best way possible if the opportunity arises. I think that is something that helps you kind of swallow the fact that you might not be living in a revolutionary moment yourself.
Yeah, but also revolution is built on hope. Like I actually quite like the quote from Star Wars, the one from Leia actually, the one about hope. So hope is like the sun. If you only believe it when you see it, you'll never make it through the night.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Eh? Good old Leia. Eh? Very insightful. She is. And she's a
Yeah.
rebel. She's a rebel through and through,
Well,
that one.
well, exactly, and like that's one of that's one of the well, actually, I kind of feel like the Star Wars story mimics reality of sorts. We've discussed on the pod before where it's like, oh, it's based on um, it's based on revolution, and people have been like, oh yeah, but they do have a revolution, but then they end up recreating the status quo, which to a large extent it's true, but um, sometimes that happens with revolution that it happened where with uh, not JFK, with FDR, that with the New Deal, a lot of the unions and I guess the progressives settled for the Social Security and like all the benefits that they got. And now we're at the other end of that, where social democracy is in decline. Sure, the revolution might not happen in your lifetime, but if you, in the very least, are there to reinforce that prefigurative politics that eventually creates institutions, again, bit of a socialist terminology, to create dual power, as in, those sort of institutions that wait in the wings, that, once the state is at its most vulnerable, is able to take over, then the seeds that you plant today, people will see the fruit tomorrow.
Yes. And that's the struggle. That's the struggle. Because like, if you can establish things that are outside of the market, outside of an exchange relationship, like, because like I said before, like the relations exist like between people based on exchange. So money mediates all relations. But if you set up like some community group, you set up some international group, and it's like, and no one's there because they've been paid to be there, or they're just there because they're going to profit off it somehow, then like, that is a form of social relations that is not unknown in capitalism. I'm not saying that no one forms community groups or anything like that, or nobody has types of relationships that exist outside of an exchange relation. But like, if you form an institution that's based outside of an exchange relation, that, if it doesn't directly undermine capitalism, stands in contradiction to it, stands opposite to it. And like you said, if the organization becomes big enough in it, of itself, and the time is right, and society falls to pieces, and that organization is this kind of this saving light, and like everyone can move towards that, and it helps kind of reorganize society in the time of a crisis, then like that's a pivotal moment where society could move away from a full-blown free market style of capitalism, which is what the West and liberal democracies are constantly trying to beat home. Is like, you know, the capitalist way, the free market way, is the only way to exist socially. And so, like, yeah, if you can set up organizations that might one day take the mantle in some type of, in any area, a service, something that produces value in some way to other people, and it does so off the market, that is a way to oppose the system at the same time as just being a wage laborer as everybody else. Like, you can still have those things. You can still be opposed to the system, and be a part of the system at the same time. I think it is unfortunate, like, how complicated our social relations are under capitalism. The social division of labor is so intense that people can't just be like, you know what, fuck capitalism, I'm going to go live in the woods, because we are so alienated from nature. We're so alienated from each other. We're so alienated from, like, just the world at large, that like most people can't just go on off and live in the bush somewhere. Most people are alienated from the earth itself. Like, if you tried to go and live in a national park or something, a ranger would kick you out.
Yes.
You wouldn't actually be able to do it. Even if you wanted to live a pure and natural existence, you'd still have to buy the property and do it in your on your own private property, because someone would kick you off the land, whether it's the state or some private individual. And so, like, you can't just escape the system like that, even if you wanted to. Even if you wanted to. I know that sort of stuff happens in America and stuff like that, but like, those people own the land that they take refuge on and things like that. So like, it's very difficult, I think. And like, humans these days are way too alienated because of the social relations under capitalism. They've become way too dependent on the wonders of the capitalist society, or industrial society, let's just say, the wonders of industrial society, to go off and live, you know, in a hippie cabin in the woods somewhere. I don't know if that's really, it might be an option for very few people, but not enough of society to make a real difference. And so, yeah, if you can't detach yourself from the system, like, you know, that's not a reason to feel defeated at all. I just really want to drive that point home for us. It's not a problem at all. It's a reality that we all have to handle. But like, there are options outside of that. And yes, like, I think the way that we do things, like myself especially for IS, is like, I would like to reach people and communicate with them and bring them ideas that they might not have contemplated before, or a perspective on things, like politically, economically, that they haven't thought about before, and hope that they start to think about this stuff and ask questions like this, and talk about their own economic, political, and inner struggles. That's my take on like how I try to oppose the system. Is like, I want to spread the word and get as many people talking about this stuff as possible, whether they hate it or like it. But like, you know, as long as they're talking about it, that's the main thing for IS.
Yes. And Jack, that was our conversation about your question. I hope we answered it comprehensively. Again, we'll make sure to put the link to the Discord in the episode, in the tab below, because that was a really good question. And yes, honestly, for people in the Discord that hear this later, please ask your revolutionary questions, because you know, I had a lot of fun talking about this topic. Hope you did as well.
I did, and like, it's funny because like, it's like, you never think about actually talking about this until somebody else brings it up. Like, I've thought about this often, like this inner conflict, this cognitive dissonance that happens within myself. And I've tried to come to terms with it over the years. And like, I've really thought about like whether I'm a sellout or something like that. And if I need to, take up arms and like go live my dreams and my revolutionary zeal. And I've really had that conversation a lot. And so like, yeah, these type of questions are very interesting because they allow you to have a conversation that is obviously pervasive among us revolutionaries. It's not until it stares you in the face that you're like, oh wow, other people have these thoughts too. Let's have a chat for us. So yeah, thank you, Jack. Good question.
And of course, the last segment of the podcast. What's that synthwave art?
That's a really good question. What is that synthwave art for IS?
Do you want to have a guess?
Yes. Yes, I do. It is two randoms sitting in a broken down office contemplating the economic struggle.
Okay, that was a pretty good crack.
Thank you very much.
So the prompt was seeing the decline of social democracy and using coalition building and leftist blocs in order to bring about the socialist revolution.
Right. I'm struggling to see the coalition there. So AI is being very, very sarcastic on this one because like that looks like not only an abandoned or an empty building, but one that's been abandoned. So like I think AI is having you on there for us, taking a joke at your expense.
I think it might have taken the leftist blocks a bit too seriously.
There's a lot of blocks.
I think it wanted to create the coalition building, but then the capitalists who made this program prevented them from.
Yeah, I can see that. Was there like two people in that coalition? Unless everyone else is joining like virtually through like some headset or something like that, some VR technology that we're not aware of. But like, yes, it's an empty room. It's a very harrowing look at the coalition there for us, unfortunately.
Well, no, it could just be the start of the coalition. How about that?
Thank you, Princess Leia. Thank you for your hope there. Very good.
Okay, and with that, everyone, thank you for watching and listening to this episode. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And I'll give it off to you, Mr. E, to sign us off.
Thank you very much, Forius. And to all of you out there, please remember, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more so you don't miss out. And until next time, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.